Okay, we're ready to go. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. And I hope everybody is settled in after a very tumultuous week. Living in Israel is pretty much always like that, but this is even more so. I think they once asked Woody Allen, who used to be a fan, uh, and he said, they said to him, "What kind of man are you?" And he said, "Like all men, only more so." So Israel is like a country, but even more so. And hopefully everybody was safe, although we obviously had quite a bit of tragedy, including yesterday, the day before yesterday, with the loss of 7 soldiers. So we'll keep them in mind as we say a prayer later for uh, the rest of our soldiers. And we will hope that victory is continuing. So very, very fascinating Sedra this week of Korach. A lot to say, but um, I want to maybe take us on a slightly different path this week. Korach comes in the midst of the breakdown of the Jewish community. It's a very sad state of affairs. And we see this very, almost it's not very gradual, it's pretty quick slide from being this nation that built up pretty much all of our institutions, received the Torah, and dedicated the Mishkan. And then we have this breakdown. Unfortunately, paradise never seems to last very long. First comes the couple of weeks ago, the mitlonanim, the people who start to squabble, start to complain about anything and everything, even the miraculous mun that tastes like anything, but they don't like it. Then comes the episode last week of the Meraglim in Parshat Shlach, who speak their Lashon Hara, their insults and their negative viewpoints of living in Israel. And this results in an entire generation that has to die out, 600,000, virtually 600,000 people because of the sin of the spies. Then this week comes Korach's rebellion. He's ostensibly against Moshe and Aaron, vying for his own leadership, but really, of course, it's directly against God and God's ultimate jurisdiction over the nation. It splits the people even more than in the story of the Meraglim. Later on, we'll experience in a couple of weeks gross sexual misbehavior in the incident of Baal Peor in Parshat Pinchas, which causes Am Yisrael to sink to the depths of degradation and reach an all-time low. So I want to try to get a handle what is happening here and how did we so quickly descend into this terrible situation? Why is it all happening? Well, we're going to start with a story, and I think it's going to lend and give us a certain eyes view of kind of a glimpse into why all these troubles are coming upon us. The Torah teaches that Korach, staging this mutiny, ostensibly against Moshe and Aaron, he has other members, other lieutenants and partners with him. So the Torah says, and you know, it begins the narrative in talking about who are these individuals that are coming against Moshe. And it lists Datan and Aviram. If you get the Parsha sheet, I have some interesting insights into these two characters. Datan and Aviram, the son of Eliav, they were brothers, by the way, and On ben Pelet. These were all descendants of Reuven. Reuven, the firstborn. So Korach feels he's not the firstborn, he's from Levi, but he feels that, you know, he's a member of the royal class. And Reuven, having been disenfranchised, the firstborn whose perks were taken away from them. So all of these individuals who feel that they have a gripe against the system, they come forward. Hashem stops the rebellion in its tracks, and it's done through the mechanism of the first recorded earthquake in history. And we're told that, this is one of the things created already at the beginning of time, that the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up, and all of the individuals who were with Korach, siding with him, there were others as well. Now, before this had happened, so God had commanded Moshe to warn the people about the impending danger to them. Hashem says, speak to the congregation, Heilu misaviv, get away from being anywhere near Korach. Mishkan Korach, Datan, Abiram, of Korach and his associates, Datan and Abiram. And then it says, Vayakam Moshe ve'elef el Datan v'Abiram. They tried to persuade them and to speak to them, but that was to no effect. And ultimately, Vaya'alu me'al Mishkan Korach, Datan v'Abiram misaviv. They got themselves up from being around them. And ultimately, as we know, what happened to them, although they were very proud and very confident that they were going to disinherit Moshe and displace him, we know that it doesn't happen. But what we see is that Datan and Abiram are mentioned 3 times as the cohorts of Korach. But what happened to On ben Pelet? He disappears from the scene. And it's quite notable that he's not there anymore. Well, what happened? So you may very well know the story. It comes from the Gemara in Sanhedrin that wants to know the answer to that question. Why and where, too, did On ben Pelet disappear? So the Gemara in Daf Kuftet, Rab says, On ben Pelet was saved by his wife. She said to him, why do you care whether Moshe remains the leader of the nation or Korach becomes the new leader? In either case, you lose. She says to him, you're Shmendrik. Nothing good is going to come out of this. If Moshe wins, well, you're part of the conspiracy, so you'll be taken down with everybody else. But even if Korach wins, Korach's an egomaniac. He's going to take all the credit for himself. You're going to get nothing out of it. So you're really barking up the wrong tree, and I don't want you going there. You can't play with them anymore. You're staying home. So what did she do? She says to him, sit down. I'm going to save your life. She gave him wine to drink. She caused him to become drunk and then laid him down within the tent where he passed out. Then she sat down at the entrance of the tent, says the Gemara, and she uncovered her hair. When Korach came to summon On to the rebellion, because he's wondering, hey, where is he? He's one of the co-conspirators. He should be here. As he approaches the tent, he sees On's wife with her hair uncovered, and he says, I can't come near. I can't come near to a woman whose hair is uncovered. And he retreats and he goes back to the middle of the controversy without On. When On finally does wake up and comes out of his drunken stupor, so Korach and his confederates were already deep in the bowels of the earth. They're gone. And as a result of that, On and his entire family survives, whereas many others who brought their families as well, they were gone. They vanished, and many people were killed as a result. The Medrash, commenting on a pasuk in Mishlei, Proverbs, that says, Nashim banta veita, wise women, each builds her house, ve'ivelet biadeha tehersenu, but those who are foolish tear the house down with their own hands. So Mishlei gives credit and says On's wife was one of those very wise women who understood what was going on here, and she saved On's life as well as that of her family. Her name is not mentioned. We do not know, and I did not find any sources that talk about what her name was, but that's also the mark of a selfless hero, someone who's not out for notoriety, somebody who just wants to do the right thing. I always say, you will pardon the pun, On may have been the son of Pelet, but his wife is the real pistol. But the question is, why is this? There's a pistol pellet. Okay. But why is this story so important to Chazal? Why are they taking the time to discuss this and the Medrash getting involved as well? There must be something a little bit deeper. And I want to suggest that at the heart of the troubles that plague Am Yisrael, as I said before, the litany of all of these sad, catastrophic events that happened to us, at the heart of them are the women of Israel. More specifically, the absence of the heroines, the brave women of Israel. When women act, good things follow. But when these good women are silent or absent, disaster generally strikes. Let's take a look at the record for a moment. Abraham, let's go back to the first Jew. Abraham would have made a tragic mistake had he kept Yishmael, his son with Hagar, as a co-inheritor. And that indeed was his plan. That's what he wanted to do, and he made that very clear. But his wife Sarah would have none of it. And in Susie's favorite pasuk, Kol asher tomar lecha Sarah, shma b'kolah. You do what your wife tells you to do. She knows best. She has more intuition. And therefore Sarah said, no, he's out. He is not going to co-inherit. In fact, he's not going to stay in the house at all. And Abraham, against his initial thoughts and feelings, he has to send her away. Then comes Yitzchak. Similar situation. Yitzchak would have made Esav, his firstborn, to be the leader of Am Yisrael. But wife Rivka would simply not allow it. She's a very clever, shrewd woman, and she orchestrates her son Yaakov's masquerade that we're all familiar with, and he receives the Bechorah, the birthright, and we survived as a people because of it as he takes over the reins of leadership. Now, what about Yaakov? Yaakov's children fight one another, and ultimately they take vengeance on Yosef, who lorded his favorite son status, who lorded that over his siblings, thus creating a brother versus brother syndrome that plagues us to this very day. This is a spiritual herpes. It keeps on giving, this brother versus brother, this sale of Yosef into Egypt. But why did it happen? I want to suggest that at least part of the reason is because one key person is missing from this story, and that, of course, is Rachel, Yosef's mother. She would have put Yosef in his place. She would have taught him humility and modesty and self-control to conduct himself in a way that would not turn his brothers against him, because this was Rachel. She knew how to practice self-control. Remember that she didn't scream out when her sister Leah was wed to her beloved Yaakov and other things in her life. But unfortunately, Rachel died young. And so she wasn't there to help raise Yosef. And he became this kind of self-admiring teenager. And it turned actually into a disaster for us. And we know the story. Later on in history, it was again the women who would stand up courageously and try to teach their men the right way to act. Many stories. They refused to worship the Egel Hazav, the golden calf, but the men persisted. The women would not give their jewelry, but the men either forcibly took it from them or used their own jewelry. And as a result of that, the men committed this terrible sin, 3,000 people killed, but no women. The women also would not follow the Meraglim, the spies. And so ultimately only the men were punished. The women were not killed in this lost generation that did not include the women. They didn't do anything wrong. In this dispute, the only men who stood up to defend Hashem were Kalev and Yoshua. Now, the rabbis point out that Kalev and Yoshua were not the greatest of the Meraglim. There were people greater, spiritually greater than them. So why did they have the gumption to stand up and go against the grain, go against the other spies, and tell them that indeed we can inherit the land of Israel and reject what the Meraglim said? So I want to suggest that, yes, they may not have been the greatest of the spies, but they had great wives. Kalev, for example, was married, according to the rabbis, to two very prominent women. One was Batya, the daughter of Paro, something that most people don't know, and more popularly married as well to Miriam, Moshe's sister. Now think about these two women for a moment. They were no shrinking violets. Batya had stood up to Paro, her adoptive father, and she insisted on adopting Moshe herself, even when there was a decree to kill all Jewish males in Egypt. Miriam, for her part, stood up to her father Amram and dramatically told him, "Father, you are worse than Paro," because Paro had uh, had um, said that all the males will be killed, but you, because you have advised all the Israelites to divorce their wives and have no more children, you actually have pronounced a death sentence on the males and females. So she ultimately convinced him to go back to his wife, Yocheved, and ultimately they bore this child, Moshe. Speaking of Miriam, it's true that Miriam stood up to Moshe and she criticized him for abandoning his wife Tzipporah, and she is punished for it, for committing the sin of Lashon Hara. But I suggest that one of the reasons that Miriam did this was because Moshe was out there missing his wife and partner, because he had left Tzipporah behind, and she was someone who could have helped him in his hour of need. And so when the Meraglim insult Israel, insult God, in essence, where is Moshe? He doesn't rebuke the spies. The pasuk tells us he and Aaron fell on their faces. You have this image of them just being helpless and falling on the ground and begging God for some kind of help in this hour of need. But maybe it's because they didn't have their wives. Tzipporah, alas, had been sent away. As for Aaron, well, his wife was Elisheva. She was the sister of Nachshon. Elisheva is only mentioned once in the text of the Torah, and that parenthetically in the genealogy of the family. Now, Elisheva, no doubt, had the DNA of her brother. We know the story of Nachshon. He's the one who jumped bravely into the sea, causing it to split as the people were lined up and facing Paro's advance towards them. Elisheva probably could have inspired Aaron to act as well, but she is invisible here in the text and in the tale. And as for the other hero, so that's about Kalev and his two wives. As for the other hero in the Meraglim story, that was Yoshua. Now, who was the wife of Yoshua? Later, by tradition, it would be none other than Rachav. We read about her in the Haftorah this past Shabbat. She is the proverbial prostitute with a heart of gold. Maybe I say she's the prototype for Pretty Woman, the famous movie, or the prostitute in another movie, Trading Places. There's a host of similar characters in literature. And the Torah, the Tanakh, makes it clear that indeed she was a prostitute running a brothel. But ultimately, let us say, she reforms and she marries Yoshua. But if you think about it, Rachav also was not shy, not delegated to the background when the time called for it. She was a hero. She rejected her Canaanite neighbors, and she ultimately cast her lot with Israel. And she kind of gave a kind of Paul Revere-like signal, one if by land, two if by sea. She gave this signal to the conquering Israelite soldiers, alerting them She saved herself and her whole family as a result, and she became the wife of Yoshua. So no doubt that if Yoshua was attracted to her, at least one reason is that they had the same strength and conviction to stand up for what was right, even at the risk of their own lives. So as we go through here, we see one after another example of these brave, courageous women who come to the rescue and save the day when it needs to be saved the most. And we also see men whose wives are nowhere to be seen, who either lead us into disaster or just wimp out when the time comes. We should also add to the mix one other example of this kind of brave woman, and those are the daughters of Tzlafchad. It must not have been easy in a man's world to confront Moshe and tell him that he and God needed to tweak the laws of inheritance, so that they were not disenfranchised just because their father did not have any sons. And ultimately, it took a lot of guts, but ultimately they say their piece. Moshe says, okay, I'll deliberate with God about it. And in the end of the day, they get justice, and they are, the law is changed, and they indeed are allowed to be able to have a share in the land. So you see running through the Torah, and to a great extent, you see very many other examples in Tanakh. You have Ruth, you have Yael. These are very courageous women who save the day when the day needs saving. Now, women can be at the front, as we see sometimes, but they also many times are in the background. But either way, they become the backbone of Klal Yisrael. They may not get all the glory they deserve, but that doesn't seem to bother them, because they know full well that they're going to save the day and that their reward will be assured. So in this breakdown that happens, we see continually that the women they're not the ones causing it, and they're not always able to save their men. They try, as we see in the case of the Egel HaZahav, or the individuals like Kalev and Yoshua who stand up, encouraged by their wives. It doesn't always work, but that's a mistake that we make. I think we can say clearly that in this war and the crisis that we're facing today in Israel, women are taking the lead in supporting the soldiers, taking care of the families when the men are away, and we should give them a tremendous amount of thanks and gratitude for what they are doing. I want to just mention one other thing. I'm not going to dwell on it, but one of the other interesting aspects of the story of On and his wife is that Korach comes, as we said before, to gather On up, bring him back to the rebellion. And of course, his wife isn't hearing about that. But when he sees On's wife with her hair uncovered, he backs away and says, well, I can't approach. You see the hypocrisy there. He's perfectly secure in bringing down Moshe, God's chosen leader. But when it comes to seeing a woman with her hair uncovered, no, he can't come anywhere near there. This is what I call selective tzidkis, selective righteousness, where people can't see the forest for the trees, and they betray themselves by showing that they really have a very shallow understanding of what the Torah and God are all about, that they're willing to commit certain sins and not others, and justify it behind some kind of false frumkeit. It's unfortunately a syndrome that we see quite often, very common today, but that's a shiur for another time. Let's leave it with our being in debt to these great women throughout history. They're in the Torah, in Tanakh, and certainly now as well, that have really kept the nation going and really been the backbone, even in the background. So we're going to say our prayer for our soldiers and hope that we will be able at some point to achieve victory in this war in Gaza. Unfortunately, it's not going as quickly as the strike on Iran. Would that we could conclude it as quickly as that happened. Hashem should hear of our tefillot. Mishaberach Avotenu Abraham Yitzchak Yaakov Yivarech et Chayalei Tzva Hagana Yisrael Omdimo Mishmar Tzenu Varei Eloheinu Migbul Lebanon Ad Midbar Mitzrayim Min Hayam HaGadol Ad Davar Arva B'Yabasha Ba'Avir V'Yam Yitein Adonai Toiveinu Hakamim Aleinu Nigafim Lipnehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yishmor V'Yatzil Et Chayaleinu Mikol Tzara V'Tzukal Mikol Negel Machala V'Yishlach Bracha V'Atzlacha B'Chol Masei Dehem Yadbir Sonenu Tachtehem V'Yatrein B'Chet Yeshua B'Ter Nitzachon V'Kuyam B'Hem HaKatuv Ki Adonai Elohechem Olechem Lachem Lilachem Lachem Imoy Bechem Lo Shi'etchem V'Nomar Amen. Next week, I have to do a wedding, so as of now, there will not be a Zoom. I'll try to put out a notice about that. So that means, all things being equal, we will meet again in 2 weeks' time, same place. Everybody stay safe, daven for our soldiers and to bring the hostages back. And thank you all for tuning in. Chodesh Tov, tonight already the first day of Tammuz. And so Chodesh Tov, Shabbat Shalom, and we should only hear Besorot Tovot, Yeshuot v'Nechamot.